Good evening, everybody. The Music Fan is back, bringing smiles to the faces, knowledge to the people, and most importantly, music to the masses. And I am back with another Are You In? Now, let's pull back the curtain for just a second before we go over the band that I'm going to be talking about tonight. You've probably seen the first two videos that I am going to be talking about albums that came out all across 2023. With it being August, I need to be able to not just talk about current stuff within the last month or two, but go back and talk about some of my favorite albums from some of my favorite bands, because I didn't want to get back to talking about the best of for this year without actually going in depth on some albums that I liked. So case in point, tonight we are talking about a band that I couldn't go without talking about. Of course, we are talking about Haken's new album entitled Fauna. This is the seventh studio album from London, England progressive metal / progressive rock band Haken. Members include Ross Jennings on lead vocals, Richard Henschel on guitars, keyboards, and backing vocals, Raymond Hearn on drums, backing vocals, and tuba, Charles Griffiths on guitars and backing vocals, Connor Green on bass, backing vocals, and Peter Jones on keyboards and backing vocals. Their previous albums include Aquarius in 2010, Visions in 2011, The Mountain in 2013, Affinity in 2016, Vector in 2018, and Virus in 2020. I've talked about this band a lot on this channel, and for good reason. This is one of the best progressive metal bands currently going, and you can see it throughout their pretty eclectic discography. You have a little bit of something more theatrical with Aquarius in 2010. Visions kind of goes on that more Dream Theater approach, but you also have the grand progressive metal staples of The Mountain and Affinity, two of the best progressive metal albums in probably the last 15 to 20 years, I would say. The Mountain being a little bit more dark and a little bit more varied in terms of sound than Affinity, but Affinity taking that 1980s / 1990s progressive metal and making it a nice homage while also building off of that idea. On any given day, I could say that The Mountain ranks over Affinity and then go completely 180 the next time around. Those albums are that good to me. You also have the companion pieces of Vector and Virus, ones that are a little bit more one note and a little bit heavier and darker with a little bit more djenty sounds. I still really enjoy these and I have put them highly rated in my end of the year lists. Affinity, I believe I had at number 2. Virus, I've had at number 2. Vector, definitely in the top 20 of that year. They've never been able to get my number 1 spot, but it's not for lack of trying. There's just been some other great albums coming out around the same time. Of course, when a new album comes out from them, I'm going to want to talk about them. But first, let's peel back the curtain on some of the other stuff that this band has done, because not only have they been able to do great work together, but over the last 4 or 5 years, some of the other members have put out solo works, and I've enjoyed all of them. Richard Henschel had The Cocoon a few years ago. I believe I had that definitely in the top 50 somewhere, maybe top 30. Ross Jennings had his own progressive rock metal album that harkened back to more of the 80s in, I believe, 2020 or 2021. That also either made my top 50 or just missed the cut, but was a very eclectic and interesting solo project from him. And then we have Charles Griffin that put out an album last year, which was so cool. It's kind of reminiscent of prehistoric ideas from like the ocean, but I love the flow of that album, and trust me, I'm going to be talking about it on one of these album reviews because it definitely made my top 100 and very high up. You might not hear it for a while, but keep that name Charles Griffith in mind because you're going to hear about him again. Either way, I've been really high on this band for a while, and when I found out that they were putting out a new album, this time a little bit more themed towards the animal kingdom, I was very intrigued. Of course, they did what they always do, which is make the first 3 tracks the 3 singles. I've had a love-hate relationship when it comes to what they do with their singles, because it usually involves them taking 3 songs, and usually earlier in the track list, which works to varying degrees. When you have it with Vector, where it's 3 out of 7 songs, not really great, especially when one of the songs on Vector that isn't a single is an intro track. On Virus, it was a little bit better because there was a few more tracks going. So 3 out of 8 or 9 or 10 tracks, more manageable. This time around, it's literally the first 3 songs on the album: Taurus, Nightingale, and The Alphabet of Me. But what's cool about this to me is that it kind of gives you an idea of what this album is going to be like. This isn't really a concept album other than the fact that it has a sharing of animal motifs. And the cool thing to me about it is it shows up in the music itself. This album reminds me a lot of what Porcupine Tree did last year with Closure and Continuation. I wouldn't say that that was their best album for Porcupine Tree, but I still really enjoyed it, and spoiler, it made my top 10 for that year. And it was off of the basis that a lot of these songs felt like their own universes. They didn't feel like they were one note. I really enjoyed what each of the 7 songs brought to the table, and they all brought something different that made me want to go back to them. Same thing with this album. This one's a little bit longer. You looking at a little bit over an hour and 9 tracks, but each one of these songs brings something different to the table that not only like captures the motif of what the animal that they're talking about, but also just breathes fresh air into a lot of these arrangements, making none of them feel like a carbon copy of the other. So first off, let's break down these first 3 tracks, the singles. Taurus, one of the heavier songs on the album. A nice way of starting off this album. It's heavy, it's earthy, it embodies the feel of a stampeding bull. The rhythmic prowess is on full display, especially during the bridge when the meter shifts to something a little bit slower. So what's super cool to me about this is it's not necessarily bouncy at first, but it has this pep to its step. Then once you get into the bridge part, it slows down, even though like the drum part kind of is playing the same ideas in terms of the rhythm. With this slow downness, it makes the drums feel different. To me, that's just super cool, the way that they can change the rhythmic idea on the fly and make it have these 2 contrasting meter sounds, even if some of the ideas that they're doing are similar. What's cool to me as well is that after you get to this bridge part where it feels like the stampede is happening, first off, Ross Jennings kind of changes up his vocal a little bit, does something a little bit more 80s, but also they take that idea in the new meter and bring it over to the last chorus. So to me, really cool, simple yet effective way of bringing something interesting to this arrangement. And that's not to say that this arrangement isn't interesting to begin with. I really enjoy the chorus melody on here. It's a little bit bouncy. There's not a lot of rhythmic complexity to the melody, but there's a lot of jumping in terms of the melodic sense. And I just like the playfulness of it. When you have those 2 contrasting meter ideas, it makes the melody feel different each time. When you have this more straightforward one at the beginning, it feels a little bit more accented. But when you get to the second idea, which it has a little bit more of a triplet idea, it feels a little bit more bouncy comparatively to everything else that's going around. I like the use of different vocal tones for Ross Jennings. He gets to play around with something that he doesn't usually get to do. So to me, super cool way of starting off this album. Next up, we have Nightingale, which is absolutely gorgeous. Love the pacing of this song. This is probably the most standard progressive rock metal song on the album, but it still layers very well. This is Haken's bread and butter, the way of layering on parts, starting off something clean, something beautiful, then going into the little bit more whimsical and dissonant, kind of like with Cockroach King. But, you know, at least you still have that beauty at the beginning. I love the guitar layerings. The chorus is simple yet super effective, especially when you have the nightingale lies sleeping in daylight. Super effective, yet super simple. A lot of held notes moving up a step, going down a couple steps, and then the do 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 do. There's some jumping, but with that you're using that step motion to get to these other chords, and all in all, super cool. There's some great harmonies on there as well. The harmonies are sparse here, but they are effective, like on the chorus, or when you get the poetic justice part. There's also some harmony parts on the end of some lines during the verse, which again are simple yet effective. Eventually the song goes full Haken with the use of rhythmic heaviness, but it's still really enjoyable. And I love how after all this tension, it does close off softly before, again, another rhythmic idea change. When I first heard this a couple of years ago, I wasn't like as much of a fan of this idea, but now that I hear it in context of everything else, it's super cool to me. It changes the feeling of that chorus where the meter is elongated a little bit, making also, of course, the vocals a little bit more elongated. Interesting idea, something that's simple yet effective, like this whole entire song. Rounding out those 3 singles, you have The Alphabet of Me, by far the poppiest song on the album, and honestly one of the more poppy songs that they've ever written. It's honestly on that level of like Earthrise, but to me this gets a little bit poppier. It's definitely because of the melodies, especially with the repeated parts where it's like walk away, no, or like that it's time to wake up and die or regenerate. More mainstream lines, but even still they bring their own Hakeness to this song. Got some strong chord progressions, some strong rhythmic progressions. Even though it's a little bit more mainstream, a little bit more simple than what they've done on other songs of this album, that rhythmic progression at least gives you something interesting to latch onto. There's also some very memorable guitar lines, especially after the bridge. And it does come up with another strong chorus. I'm not a huge fan of these verse melodies, to be honest, and the change up to a fast verse melody later on doesn't really make up for the fact that I still don't really like these verse melodies. Also, there are some 80s synth parts, but they do feel a little cheesy, especially when they staple them on at the end. That being said, like I've argued before with stuff like Leprous, I would kill to have more poppy stuff like this because the harmonic and rhythmic complexity makes up for some of these poppier moments. With the singles out of the way, this is where we get into the meat and potatoes of this album. And this is where I commend so much of what Haken does, because they have been a staple for over a decade now, and they could easily rest on their laurels. But if you get through these first 3 songs, which again, I really enjoy 2 of them. 2 of them are some of the best on the album. But if you get through these singles, you're going to be treated with a lot of really in-depth and complex arrangements. Something that I don't usually see from Haken, or not to this extent. And that's what I love about this man so much, is even after all these years, they are finding ways to reinvent themselves and challenge themselves. On the first 2 songs of Nightingale and Taurus, it was playing around with the rhythmic ideas. With the next few songs, you're seeing so much thrown in to these songs. Sometimes for the better, sometimes for a little bit of a detriment, but it's not due to a lack of trying something new. Sepulchral Beings. There's so much packed into the song. It starts off soft and beautiful. These verse melodies are some of the best on the album, especially when it just gets to the plucked guitar and the kind of elongated lines from Ross Jennings before you get into the heavy part. And then you get this rhythmic change, which is a very nice touch. It kind of reminds me of stuff that you would get off of Virus and Vector in the best way possible. Chorus is super powerful. A little clunky just in terms of the timing, but it is one of the more powerful choruses on this album. Then you get this return to this understated part with the next verse where the guitar is kind of just palm muted stuff, but the line itself is super cool, especially when you get into the end of that particular guitar cycle. This is also where you see Ross Jennings get to show off some his vocals in a little bit more understated way before you get again into another powerful chorus. After that, you get this insane guitar picked line. I haven't heard anything like this before. It's just so cool to hear new guitar ideas coming from this band. It is a song that throws so much in its way that sometimes it can be overwhelming, to the point where, like, you know, maybe the first two times where you're like, oh my god, this song still isn't over. But with that being said, like, there's just so many cool ideas thrown their way, which I just really enjoy. Beneath the White Rainbow, another heavy song on this album. Again, something that feels a little bit more vectorish, virus era. It's not necessarily my favorite song, but there are some really cool ideas on here. Verse, not really my favorite on the album. Neither are like the crazy yelped parts at the end where Ross Jennings is at like the highest part of his register. Not my favorite parts, but the chorus is solid. Love the chorus melody on here comparatively with the chord progression going there. This song is hectic at times. This one uses a lot of glitch ideas, although it's not the only glitch song on this album. What's cool to me is this glitch keyboard idea that happens throughout this bridge part. It's weird but trippy yet fun. Honestly, a lot of this song reminds me of something that you could have heard off of Black Clouds and Silver Linings or Systematic Chaos era Dream Theater. I also really enjoyed the tension that is used in the melody after that like very hectic, tripped out part. Very reminiscent of In Memoriam off of The Mountain. The next part, like I said, is basically Jennings screaming at his high range. Fits the hecticness of the song, and I do like the glitched out drum parts here, but it's not like my favorite song on the album. I enjoy what is brought to the table in bits and pieces on this one, but there are definitely some parts here that I would just pass over. Coming up on the sixth song, another highlight for me. Island in the Clouds, so good. This is another one that brings a lot of different parts in a 8-minute package. To me, though, out of the last three that we talked about, this is one that flows the best. The drum part on the song is some of the best on the album. I love the bounce on this song, which you feel immediately with the synth and the bass guitar bouncing between F sharp minor 7 and F major 7. You get this nice, tense, half-step approach for most of this verse. I like how Ross Jennings bounces all over this particular verse, especially when he gets the do 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 do, that like bouncy idea, which contrasts so well with the chorus, which is more legato. I love this contrast, especially in that particular meter. I also love how, as this song goes on, more guitars are added. The guitar on the second verse is so good, especially with its really contrasted rhythmic idea. It's more like 16th notes with some pauses that like contrast the bounciness of everything else going around it, but still super cool. I also really enjoyed the counter melody on the second chorus. And then this bridge on this song is so good. The kindness I could kill you with 1 foot in Elysium. That whole entire part with this picked guitar line is so cool and a nice breather on this song. It doesn't go as far out as Sempiternal Beings, but it is still a song that brings so much to the table and is so effective. The last three songs are a little bit hit or miss. Love Bite is another poppy song, but this one feels weird to me with its fast-picked guitars over a sweet major chord progression. Everyone might not get this, but I believe there's a song off of Immortalized, the Disturbed album called The Light, I want to say. It was one of their singles. It always feels weird to me when metal does a major progression. This particular song also just feels weird. It has a little bit of that 80s hinge as well. You also have the OAO kind of backing vocals at parts. Again, guitar parts are solid. Haken's not doing anything wrong in terms of musicianship. They're always great with that stuff. But to me, this overall arrangement just feels weird. It's a nice experiment that just didn't pan out. To me, it's the weakest song on the album. Then you have Elephants Never Forget, this 12 minute track, which is super grand yet aloof, which feels almost like an elephant, right? The intro feels standard 80s 90s prog metal, as if it was like an opening to a Dream Theater song. It just has a sense of grandeur. Then this first verse feels like circus, like a ringmaster was introducing the public to the main attraction that's going on. I really enjoy Ross Jennings' theatricals on this, and definitely could have felt like something off of Aquarius. The chorus itself feels a little bit more modern, giving away from like this 80s 90s approach, but it also has some other homages, I would say, for other bands throughout this song. So, after the first two choruses and verses, you get this bridge which feels kind of Nine Inch Nails. Gonna be honest, like I feel something inside of me, it feels a little bit industrial, which is really interesting for a Haken song. Before you get to this more earthy and plodding section, which feels like the full weight of an elephant, especially the heavy are my footsteps, like that part, really out of time, really like plodding, really like aloof. Like, it's super cool what they're bringing to the table on this song. It does feel a little bit all over the place at times with its length, and I would say it doesn't necessarily stick the landing going back into the main idea, but as a whole, this is one of the better songs in capturing the vibe of the type of animal that they are trying to emit through the song. And to finish it up, you have probably easily one of the top 5 most beautiful songs from Haken ever. Off the top of my head, I would say Something or Nothing, one of those two. Death Embraces is another one. I would say Lapse is in there. I would say Bound by Gravity. And this particular one, Eyes of Ebony. This song starts off so beautifully. This song has such a beautiful chord progression and melody, and I love how this song builds. After that second chorus, you get another glitching idea with piano and an interesting bass line where I believe it's G to F sharp, so you have that major 7 approach, and it starts slowly building with these glitch ideas. And I think this particular one does it so much better than Beneath the White Rainbow. It builds up to this incredibly powerful last chorus where you have this flowing arpeggiated guitar line where Ross Jennings gets to have one last powerful moment. And then it feels like the song is going to end, but it does this really nice decrescendo as the song is dying out, which fits so perfectly with the theme of this song. What I also find super cool is each one of these songs has kind of like a double meaning in terms of the theme of their song. For example, with Taurus, the lyrics seem to be about moving to the future and not being able to look back in terms of like the advancement of technology and global warming and everything like that, as if it's like a stampede of bulls, right? You're running away from the bulls and you can't go back, right? But it's also about Ukrainian refugees trying to escape from the Russian war. Nightingale. There's some homages to Hans Christian Andersen's fairy tale of the same name. It's also the national bird of Ukraine, but it also seems to be talking about the idea of the creative process and trying to find that musical spark without becoming formulaic. Island in the Clouds seems to be about our possession of our own mortality, even when we feel invincible, but there's also references to Jurassic Park in there. Eyes of Ebony, talking about not just the passing of Richard Henschel's dad in 2021, but also about the ongoing extinction of the white rhino. Sepulchral Beings. This one is so jam-packed with a couple of different things, because like in the first part, they're talking about the immortal jellyfish, but like as you get into like halfway through the song, it switches up to the idea of Medusa and Greek mythology, and then like the passage of chime on a human and universal level. There's so much jam-packed because of all these double entendres in terms of names, both in like mythology, but also in the terminology of animals. Another one like this is Elephants Never Forget. It's about the elephant man, the man who was born with deformities, but it's also about woolly mammoths. Love Bite is like a love song that is based around the mating practices of the black widow spider. So there's a lot of jam-packed stuff thrown into here. This is not a simple album. And I don't think you necessarily get it the first time through. I think there's so many great arrangements on here, but it takes time. But if you have that time, you're in for a treat. To me, this is probably right up there in terms of like potential third place album for them. You know, after the Mountain of Infinity, to me, you kind of have Virus Vector and Fauna fighting for third place. And, you know, in a stacked catalog like Haken, that's a pretty damn good sign. For this album, you do need to take time with it. This isn't one where you can just listen to it one time through and get everything that it's going to throw at you. This is one that you kind of need to listen to some of these songs a few times. But I think there's so many great parts to this album that it's worth going back through. So for me, this is a play on repeat. Yes, some of these songs I'm not the biggest fans of. Love Bite is not necessarily my cup of tea. And The Alphabet of Me kind of stays a little bit too long. But honestly, those are two of the shortest songs. So it's not like you're suffering through them. And I think each of them have something to latch onto that you will at least enjoy for a little bit. It's track 3 and track 7. You get a lot of time with these other awesome and complex arrangements that you almost forget, oh hey, this song is coming up next. I can't necessarily say this is a contender for Album of the Year just yet, but as I keep listening to it more and more, it keeps rising up my ranks. So who knows, maybe by the end of this year, this will be a top 5 album. For me, at least at this point, this is definitely in the top 20 album for this year, probably top 15 as I'm thinking about it right now. But make no mistake, even though it's not a concept album, this is a complex album that is worth your time if you give it the time that it deserves. That's it for this particular part of the review, but we have one more thing to talk about, and thank you for sticking through this longer review. I had a lot to say about this album apparently, so I'll try to be quick with my number 98 album from 2022. That is Cave In with Heavy Pendulum. I'm going to be honest, didn't really know much about this band until my roommate told me about them. They are a local band coming out of the Boston area. They have been on the scene for a little bit, but this is my first time listening to them. And first time around, didn't really think much of it, but I gave it another shot, and that's when it finally clicked with me. It is a progressive album. It is an eclectic album, but it also, what draws me to this album is the sludginess of this album too. It's not a very clean progressive album, and to me it comes off as a little bit refreshing for that. I don't really have a lot of progressive albums that I can look at and be like, oh, this has this sludginess to it too. So it brings a diversity here that I really enjoy. This is a long album. It is 14 tracks and 70 minutes, but there is enough there to sink you into, whether it's the power of New Reality, the pace of Floating Skulls, the bluesiness of Heavy Pendulum, the more doomish parts of Blinded by a Blaze, the slowness of Nightmare Eyes, this kind of like rock-ish song with Waiting for Love, the more Alice in Chains vibe of Reckoning, or by far the best song on the album, the closer, Wavering Angel, a 12 to 14 minute track which builds so well. If I was to do a top 50 list of my favorite songs of 2022, by far this would be on that. It is such a great song. I love the build. You know, it doesn't necessarily start great with the vocals. It's a little bit soft, but like as the song goes on, the guitar parts get layered in, and I just find the whole entire song so gratifying. Yes, there's a lot there, and maybe that's why it's not like higher on my list, but make no mistake, there's a lot there to satiate yourself as a progressive, sludgy, doomish fan. There's not a song on here that I'm going to skip. There's just 5 or 6 songs that I really enjoy, and the other 8, 2 of them are interludes, and the other ones are very serviceable that bring you to those next steps. So check it out. If you missed it last year, I think you'll be in for a treat. So thank you so much for watching this longer video. I appreciate you all for doing that. A few things that you can do. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like. Let me know if you like or don't like this album and your reasons why. Let me know some other albums from 2023 that you would like me to review. Share this with your friends if you think that they're going to enjoy this. And then finally, and most importantly, if you haven't already, please subscribe to this channel. So that way I know that you enjoy what I'm doing and want to see more videos like this in the future. So I'll be back with another Are You In shortly. Until then, this is The Music Fan, and I'm signing off.